Hello and welcome to the final lecture on Key Concept 2.12, which looks at the beginnings of the English colonies, and this lecture will focus on C, D, and E. So Key Concept C here is the middle colonies, and the middle colonies, these ones did quite well, and we can see those key words there that are underlined, and if we want to break it down, they were populous, they were prosperous, and they were diverse in their peoples and their religions. And so the middle colonies, we're looking at the areas here from like New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We're going to look at New York and Pennsylvania, and also we'll look at Maryland here as well. So these ones developed a little bit later after the English Civil Wars, and most of these were gifts from the king. So we'll start with Maryland, a gift of land to from the king to Lord Baltimore. He's a Catholic, and he's hoping that Maryland can be a safe place for Catholics who are persecuted in English to go. And so it had official toleration. Now, more Protestants and Anglicans end up moving into Maryland than Catholics, but there was official toleration, known as the Act of Toleration, that provided equal protection under the law to all Christians. But if you were not Christian, like you were atheist or Jewish, the punishment is death. So it's very ironic, the Act of Toleration. And Maryland flourished as part of the tobacco economy, along with Virginia in the Chesapeake Bay. Moving on, New York, again, this was a gift from the English king, but it was only after they seized it from the Dutch, who first established it and did very well with commerce, particularly fur. And so it was seized by the English in 1664, and King Charles gave it to his brother, Duke of York, where it's got his name, New York. And the Dutch were told, you can stay, and which is why when the English came, they said, surrender, you can live your life, and they're fine. Okay, we can keep to trade. Their culture remained for quite some time, and you see it in names like Roosevelt, Harlem, Knickerbockers, the New York Knickerbockers basketball club. Those are all remnants of their Dutch beginnings. And the English gained a natural harbor, very good harbor, and a river up the Hudson River. This is the Hudson River up here to the fur trading going on in the interior. Pennsylvania, the most successful of the middle colonies. It was a gift to William Penn, William Penn's father, from King Charles II. Penn's a Quaker, another one of these Protestant groups who are persecuted in England, and he's hoping it can be a place where they can go. Quakers gave up all intermediates between a person and God. They got rid of the book even in themselves. They're unpopular and disliked. They refuse to fight. They refuse to pay their taxes because they say it goes towards a war machine, and highly controversial people. And so Penn saw it as a place, not only as a safe place for Quakers like himself, but also an opportunity to build a model community. And so he set up what he called his holy experiment, where there would be full religious toleration. He doesn't care what you are, just leave others alone, practice your own, and fair dealings with natives. And then he put out a lot of advertisements throughout Western Europe saying, would you like to come on over and settle in this model community that I've put up? And it was the most famous one, and it did attract a lot of people, so there's great diversity. Success or failure? Well, in the long run, there would be people moving out west, and they would come into conflict with natives, and there would be, bullying and persecuting of different religious groups. But for the most part, despite their differences, they were able to build a pretty good, successful community, and the natives were dealt with much better than other English colonies. Here they are signing a treaty with natives, and this is showing the diversity. So this is all the middle colonies. 2/5 are English, but less than half, a solid fifth, are German, and then we can see how they break up. And there are Africans in all the colonies, north to south, there were Africans. All right, looking at D, which is the plantation colonies of the southernmost United States, and then, or what will become the United States, and into the West Indies. And these are plantations growing sugar and rice for the most part, and lots of slaves. So these two are very much linked. In the West Indies, they're growing sugar, but they don't want to waste any of the land because the sugar is just so valuable. So they don't want to waste land growing food for their slaves. So the Carolinas were developed as rice-growing regions where they could grow rice and ship it over to the West Indies and feed their slaves. So they're intricately linked. The sugar lords of the West Indies, this is early capitalism. It's intensive up front. You got to get the money to get the slaves and to get the land going. And then it's only after, a season that you can get some of that back. And they need a lot of slaves. And so they invested in and ported lots of slaves, as much as 4-to-1 ratio. And to control the slaves, they come up with laws and restrictions controlling their freedoms and rights, and making it more difficult for them to, say, communicate, get an education. And so these black codes were quite strict to control the slaves. This slave model, began in the West Indies under English and would be copied, say, later in Virginia after, say, Bacon's Rebellion, when they started bringing more African slaves. So the southern economies, all of them tend to be cash crops, with tobacco up in the north around the Chesapeake in Maryland and Virginia, and then a little bit in North Carolina, and then southern Carolina growing rice to feed the slaves of the West Indies. And they're bringing in, of course, lots of African slaves into these areas as well, particularly ones that know how to grow rice, which is grown in Africa. If we compare all of the colonies, we can see from north to south, we see from more economic diversity to less economic diversity, and we can see the population, fewer slaves to more slaves. And, a big reason why is the geography, the land and the climate. All right, finally, this key idea here known as salutary neglect, that the distance, and Britain really isn't focused on what's going on in the colonies. They're dealing with civil wars and the 30 Years' Wars, and they're not really concerned with what's going on over in those American colonies. So they just leave them alone. And this is known as salutary neglect. Salutary, it's good neglect. And the concept that the English government is leaving them alone, and this helped to develop democratic traditions and American identity. And those democratic traditions in New England, the town hall meetings, so you think the Orders of Connecticut, the Mayflower Compact, and in the South, the House of Burgesses, which is dominated by the elite planters. And this is a long-term effect of the American Revolution, because later, once the colonies become more valuable, and as the English try to incorporate them more into the British Empire through rules and regulations and taxes, the Americans will push back, and it will turn into a crisis that eventually leads to the Americans declaring their independence. But it's a key idea, this salutary neglect. They're being left alone. Democratic traditions develop, and it helps, create self-government and an American identity. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. Thank you very much for listening.